alive. Oh, he's alive. He's alive. It's alive. It's alive.
Wow, was there a real Dr. Frankenstein? In 1818, a 20-year-old Mary Shelley anonymously published her novel, Frankenstein. The book told the story of a mad scientist who reanimated a corpse and created a now famous monster. Though Shelley did not explain in her book of how exactly Dr. Frankenstein brought his monster back to life, most interpretations of the novel assume a lightning bolt, zapping the creature back into existence. This may not be how Shelley thought the corpse should be brought back to life when she wrote the story. It is not far off from how contemporary scientists have been attempting similar experiments. Italian physicist and biologist Luigi Galvani developed an interest in medical electricity and how it could be used on animals. Bringing dead things to life with power of electricity was an old idea even when Shelley started writing in 1818. Galvani was a lecturer at the University of Bologna in the late 18th century. He was interested in everything. He was a chemist, a physicist, an anatomist, a physician, and a philosopher. He excelled at everything. In the late 1770s, after nearly 20 years of studying obstetrics, comparative anatomy, and physiology, Galvani decided to start working on frogs' legs. Yes, frogs' legs. According to legend, Galvani was skinning the severed lower half of a frog when his assistant's scalpel touched a bronze hook in the animal's flesh. All at once, the legs twitched as if it were trying to hop away. This worked with two different metals as well as lightning. The incident gave Galvani an idea. He started experimenting. He published his results in 1780. Galvani hypothesized that the muscles of the dead frogs contained some vital fluid he called animal electricity. He believed the electrical contact animated whatever residue animal electric fluid remained in the frog's legs. This started a little respectful argument with Alessandro Volta, the battery guy. He confirmed Galvani's findings, but said that any electricity would make the animal move, not just static electricity that Galvani was using. A shock was a shock, he said, and then he invented the first chemical electrical battery to prove it. Galvani's name has been attached to the term galvanism, or electricity produced by a chemical action. Galvani was getting too old to start a war over his theory. Instead, he left the task of defending his ideas to his nephew, Giovani Alini. On January 18, 1803, a criminal named George Foster was hanged at Newgate in London. The court had found him guilty of drowning his wife and child in a canal. He was sentenced to death, but also to be dissected afterwards. This sentence was designed not to only provide medicine with corpses on which to experiment, but also to ensure that the condemned criminal could not rise on Judgment Day, as his body would be cut into pieces and dissected and discarded. He was hung, and Foster's body was delivered to the workshop of Giovani Alini, who allegedly moved to the Newgate neighborhood specifically to be close to the executions that were taking place. Quickly, Aldini summons an audience of medical students and curious onlookers. He began to experiment on the corpse. First, he moved Foster's limbs to just demonstrate that he was truly dead. Then he applied the electrodes to each of Foster's ears and passed a current through the dead man's head. Now here's what a reporter said who had been witnessing this horrifying demonstration.
On the first application of the process to the face, the jaws of the deceased criminal began to quiver, and the adjoining muscles were horribly contoured. One eye was actually opened. In the subsequent part of the process, the right hand was raised and clenched, and the legs and thighs were set in motion.
Spectators must have wondered if Aldini was raising the murderer from the dead. This had to be a disturbing thought to many people. Questions were even asked in the government circles about what the law said if Foster had actually somehow come back to life. Most came to the conclusion, though, we have to hang him a second time. Aldini's real Frankenstein experiments became the talk of London, and his uncle's ideas about animal electricity started to seem credible after all. Now, right around the time that Aldini was experimenting with his executed criminals in London, a young Scottish scientist and scriptural geologist named Andrew Yuri was pursuing a degree in Glasgow. He was another one of these geniuses who was interested in everything. Having just graduated, he was looking for something to study. He found Aldini's work fascinating and decided to try it for himself. By 1818, Yuri had no issue obtaining a supply of freshly hanged criminals to experiment on. Executions in Britain at the time were common since around 300 crimes carried the death penalty, so Yuri kept very busy. He strangely enough enjoyed a crowd watching his procedures. These were not experiments so much as they were just outright public freak shows that helped him build a reputation as a scientific wizard of sorts. Like Aldini, he specialized in shocking various parts of the body to make them move. Was he answering any real scientific questions? Probably not. He apparently liked looking cool and having a shock value. On November 4th, 1818, Yuri carried out an electrical experiment on the body of an executed murderer named Matthew Clydesdale. He did this with James Jeffrey, an anatomy professor at the University of Glasgow. These scientists stimulated Clydesdale's diaphragm and a nerve to make it appear as if they were breathing. And when they applied the electricity to the nerve of his face, let's listen to what Yuri had to say as reported in the Proceedings of the Royal Society of Medicine. Every muscle of the body was immediately agitated with convulsive movements resembling a violent shuddering from cold. On the movement of the second rod to the hip to the heel, the knee being previously bent, the leg was thrown out with such violence as nearly to overturn one of the assistants, who in vain tried to prevent this extension. The body was also made to perform movements of breathing by stimulating the phrenic nerve and the diaphragm. When the supraorbital nerve was excited, every muscle in his countenance was simultaneously thrown into fearful action. Horror, despair, anguish, and ghastly smiles united their hideous expressions in the murderer's face. At this period, several of the spectators were forced to leave the apartment from terror or sickness, and one gentleman actually fainted. Well, Yuri was eventually pressured into giving up his real Frankenstein experiments, as local churches were threatening to shut him down by force if he didn't stop summoning demons into his lab. So he concluded very quickly that this was a waste of time. He then turned his attention to more productive pursuits, such as revolutionizing the way volumes are measured and developing a working thermostat. So were these mad scientists crazy?
Great Scott!
Probably not. Well, electricity to bring someone back to life has been made a reality, as this is now used to restart a person's heart. Monsters are fun and even more exciting if some of the story is based in truth. That is strange indeed. If you're interested in the making of some classic monster movies, we'll put a link down below. Thanks for watching. We'll keep the videos coming here on Strange History. Hey, check out our video on the Salem Witch Trials.